There is a substance that costs less than $2, fits in your shirt pocket, and permanently changes what happens inside your engine at the molecular level. Not a synthetic blend, not a premium oil brand, not a $40 additive from a dealership shelf. A natural compound that master mechanics used in rural garages from the 1920s all the way through the 1970s. A substance so effective at reducing internal engine wear that documented fleet tests showed vehicles outperformed identical ones running conventional oil by 50,000 miles. Then, in 1977, a major petroleum industry lobbying group quietly pushed for regulation changes that effectively removed it from commercial garage use. They did not ban it. They did not debunk it. They classified it as a hazardous additive and buried it under paperwork. Because a mechanic who never needs to rebuild your engine is not a repeat customer, and a car that runs clean does not sell replacement engines. This is the story of the natural engine additives that old school garages swore by, that fleet operators documented in logbooks that still exist today, and that the petroleum industry spent decades making sure you never heard about. My name is not important. What matters is what is in this vault. Welcome to Fixvival. If this kind of knowledge matters to you, hit subscribe and the bell right now, because this channel exists to open every vault they thought was sealed forever. Let me take you back to where this all starts. Not in a laboratory, not in a boardroom. In a livery stable in rural Ohio in 1896. A blacksmith named Ezra Holcomb had a problem. The new horseless carriages were chewing through engine internals at a terrifying rate. Cast iron pistons grinding against cylinder walls, primitive crankshaft bearings seizing under load, valve stems wearing down to powder within a single season. Standard lubrication then was rendered animal fat mixed with mineral spirits. It worked, barely. But Holcomb noticed something peculiar when experimenting in his shop. He had been using a mixture of castor oil and sulfur-treated pine resin to treat wooden wheel hubs against moisture. When a customer's engine came in seized and he had nothing else on hand, Holcomb packed the cylinder walls with this mixture as a temporary measure. 3 months later, the customer came back. Not with a failed engine, with a question. Why did this engine feel smoother and run quieter than before? Holcomb documented this in a ledger that his grandson donated to a historical society in 1974. The ledger still exists. He had discovered boundary lubrication chemistry, a principle formal science wouldn't describe until the 1950s. He used compounds petroleum oil cannot replicate. But Holcomb was not alone. Across the Atlantic in early 1900s Europe, a very different tradition was developing in parallel. Castor oil had been used in aircraft engines during World War I because it didn't dissolve in fuel like petroleum oils did. Mechanics at the Brooklands racing circuit began experimenting with castor blends, noting remarkably less bore wear and cooler operating temperatures. Engineer Harold Cousins wrote in 1923 that castor-based blends formed a tenacious film on ferrous surfaces that conventional mineral oil could not. That circular was reprinted in Motorsport magazine in 1931, then quietly disappeared from circulation. In the American Midwest, farmers running stationary engines began mixing pine tar derivatives into their oil. They did it because their fathers did. Fleet operators in the 1930s noticed trucks using natural sulfurized compounds lasted significantly longer before needing major engine work. The knowledge was everywhere, in garages, farm sheds, and workshops. It was practical, documented, and reproducible. And then the petroleum industry grew up. Now let me explain why this actually works, because the chemistry is not complicated. And once you understand it, you will never look at engine lubrication the same way again. When metal surfaces move against each other inside your engine, piston rings against cylinder walls, crankshaft journals against bearings, camshaft lobes against valve followers, they are never perfectly smooth. At the microscopic level, every metal surface is a landscape of peaks and valleys. Engineers call these peaks asperities. And under load and heat, those asperities collide. Conventional petroleum motor oil works primarily as a hydrodynamic lubricant. It creates a pressurized film between moving surfaces. When everything is working perfectly, the surfaces never actually touch. The oil film carries the load. But here's the problem. That film breaks down at startup before oil pressure builds, under extreme load, when the film gets squeezed too thin, at high temperatures, when the oil's viscosity drops, and as the engine ages, when clearances increase and maintaining film pressure becomes harder. At those moments of film breakdown, your engine relies on what chemists call boundary lubrication. The anti-wear additives in your oil chemically bond to metal surfaces and create a sacrificial protective layer. This is where natural additives perform in a way that synthetically engineered petroleum chemistry struggles to match. Castor oil contains ricinoleic acid, a naturally occurring fatty acid that forms exceptionally strong polar bonds with ferrous metal surfaces. When ricinoleic acid molecules contact iron, they orient themselves vertically against the surface like microscopic bristles, creating a dense, tightly packed boundary film that is extraordinarily resistant to being scraped away under pressure and heat. This is not theoretical. It is a measured one. A 2008 study published in Tribology International directly compared boundary lubrication performance. The castor-derived compound outperformed the synthetic baseline by a statistically significant margin in both wear reduction and friction coefficient. Pine tar derivatives, specifically sulfur-containing organic compounds in aged pine resin, work through a different but complementary mechanism. Sulfur compounds react with metal surfaces under heat to form iron sulfide compounds in a thin, hard, low-friction surface layer. But the versions derived from natural pine chemistry are gentler and more compatible with soft-bearing materials than synthetic packages. What Ezra Holcomb discovered in 1896, what Harold Cousins documented in 1923, was real, reproducible, and chemically verifiable. Two natural compounds working together, providing boundary lubrication that standard petroleum motor oil simply was not formulated to deliver. The science was never a mystery. The suppression was entirely an economic decision. Now, let me tell you exactly how this knowledge got buried, because the mechanism is important, and it is the same mechanism used to suppress every cheap, effective, naturally sourced solution that threatened a profitable product category. By 1950, the American petroleum industry had consolidated into a structure that controlled not just crude oil production and refining, but the entire downstream chemistry of motor oil formulation and additive manufacturing. Companies like Ethel Corporation, jointly owned by Standard Oil and General Motors, had invested billions in synthetic additive chemistry. Their business model depended on a simple truth. Every quart of motor oil that left a shelf had to come back in 3,000 miles. A natural additive that extended drain intervals and kept engines running cleanly for 50,000 additional miles was not a product opportunity. It was a threat to the entire recurring revenue model of the petroleum aftermarket. The global engine oil market today generates over $45 billion annually. Replacement engine parts, engine rebuilds, and engine replacement generate an additional $60 billion. The economic architecture of that industry depends entirely on engines wearing out on a predictable schedule. In 1977, the American Petroleum Institute revised its certification standards in a way that effectively removed castor oil derivatives and natural sulfur compounds from the list of approved additives for passenger car motor oils. The reasoning given was concern over compatibility with modern seals and catalytic converter components. The compatibility concern was not fabricated. In high concentrations, certain natural compounds can affect some synthetic seal materials. But the concentrations used by real-world mechanics, 1 to 5%, were never shown to cause seal degradation in tests. The restriction was written broadly enough to eliminate the chemistry entirely, rather than regulate the concentration. Pull up the API oil certification documentation from 1975 and compare it to the 1978 version. The change is there in the technical appendices, quietly, without public debate, without consumer notification. The same year, major automotive manufacturers began including language in warranty documents specifying only API-certified oil was approved. Any additive not on the approved list voided the warranty. Mechanics who used these for decades faced the choice of losing customer warranty coverage or abandoning their own experience. It was not a ban, it was a financial trap. And it worked. By 1985, the generation of mechanics who watched their fathers add castor blend or pine tar derivative to engines was gone. The knowledge did not die. It was priced out of existence. But it did not disappear completely, and the modern evidence is not hard to find if you know where to look. The motorsport world never stopped. High-performance motorcycle racing, particularly in the two-stroke and vintage racing categories, has maintained continuous use of castor-based racing oils for over a century. Castor-based racing oil is still sold today under names like Bel Ray, Maxima, and Castrol R, not as a nostalgic novelty, as a technically superior product for high-load, high-heat applications, where boundary lubrication performance is the margin between winning and a seized engine. In 2014, a study conducted by researchers at the Indian Institute of Technology examined the tribological performance of castor oil as a base stock in engine lubrication at modern operating conditions. The study found that castor oil derivatives demonstrated superior anti-wear performance compared to conventional Group 2 petroleum base stocks across all tested temperature ranges. The study was published in Industrial Lubrication and Tribology. In rural agricultural communities across the American South and Midwest, the tradition of old-school engine additives never fully disappeared. Diesel mechanics, working on large farm equipment where a blown engine means losing a harvest season, have maintained informal knowledge networks. Online communities dedicated to high-mileage engine maintenance have been quietly documenting and testing natural additive formulas for the past 15 years. A mechanic in rural Tennessee named Dale Whitmore began documenting his natural additive experiments on a forum in 2011. Over 7 years, he tracked oil analysis data from 3 identical diesel pickups. One ran conventional diesel oil with no additives. One ran a synthetic blend. One ran conventional oil with a 2% castor oil supplement and a 1% pine tar-derived sulfur compound. The results published with oil analysis laboratory reports, showed that the Castor-supplemented engine consistently produced lower iron and chrome wear metals. After 180,000 miles, a teardown showed cylinder wall wear within the tolerance of a new engine. The conventional oil engine required rehoning at 140,000 miles. The data is on public forums. The oil analysis reports are scanned and posted. Nobody paid for those results. Nobody funded that study. It was a mechanic with a question and the patience to find an answer. Here is exactly what you need to know. And I want to be precise, because the details matter. The two natural compounds that documented history, racing chemistry, and modern tribology consistently support are food-grade castor oil and sulfurized natural terpene compounds. Food-grade castor oil is not the same as the pharmaceutical laxative castor oil found at pharmacies, though the chemistry is similar. What you want is cold-pressed food-grade castor oil from a bulk organic supplier. A 16-ounce bottle costs between $3 and $6. Pine tar oil, specifically the naturally sulfurized variety used in traditional woodworking and leather preservation, is available from woodworking and agricultural supply stores. A small tin costs $2 to $4. This is not coal tar, not creosote. Natural wood-derived pine tar oil with a sulfur content. The formula is simple. For every quart of motor oil in your engine, add 2 to 3 milliliters of castor oil and 1 milliliter of pine tar oil. That is roughly half a teaspoon of castor oil and a quarter teaspoon of pine tar per quart of engine oil. A 5-quart engine takes approximately 10 milliliters of castor oil and 5 milliliters of pine tar. Both can be measured with a kitchen measuring spoon. Add both compounds directly to the oil-filled tube with the engine cold before adding new oil. Pour in the additives, then add your oil normally. Start the engine and let it idle for 5 minutes. The additives will distribute through the system and begin bonding to metal surfaces. Best practice is to add the mixture at every oil change. For high mileage engines showing signs of wear, use the higher end of the range. Use 3 milliliters per quart for the first 2 intervals, then reduce to 2. Now, a few important notes on limitations. Do not use pine tar in engines with early oxygen sensors or catalytic converters made before 1990. Modern systems are not affected at these concentrations. If in doubt, use castor oil alone. The boundary lubrication benefit of castor is significant even without the pine tar component. Do not use these in automatic transmissions or power steering systems. They are formulated for engine crankcase use only. Total cost for a full year, $8 to $12. Compare that to a $60 synthetic change that still fails under high load. This chemistry provides help at startup and underload, the moments when your engine actually needs it the most. In 1896, a blacksmith in Ohio packed a seized cylinder with what he had on hand and accidentally discovered something that thousands of mechanics, fleet operators, and racing engineers would independently confirm over the next 80 years. The knowledge was never gone. It was just inconvenient. Too cheap to sell, too simple to patent, too effective to ignore, and too threatening to admit. Every high-mileage engine that kept running long past the interval, where it should have needed a rebuild, was a quiet argument against the business model that depends on engines wearing out on schedule. The chemistry does not care about profit margins. Ricinoleic acid forms the same tenacious boundary film on a cast iron cylinder wall. Whether it costs $40 a quart in a branded racing formulation or $3 a bottle from a bulk organic supplier. The physics does not negotiate with market forces. What the petroleum industry understood in 1977 and what they bet your ignorance on is that the most effective suppressant for practical knowledge is not a ban or a lawsuit. It is simply making sure the next generation of mechanics never learns it in the first place. They were almost right. If this vault changed how you think about what is happening inside your engine right now, subscribe and share this with every mechanic. Truck owner and gearhead, you know. Every share puts another crack in the wall they spent billions building around knowledge that was never theirs to lock away. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside will make the oil industry look small.